Hello and welcome to July's Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live session. I'm Rachel Schofield, I'm your host today, joining you from Shape Talent, an award-winning gender equity consultancy. And I'm delighted every month to come and talk to you about crucial issues in the area of gender equity and career development, particularly for women. Today, we are diving into a very important topic, coaching. Is it just me, or here on LinkedIn does every 10th person seem to be a coach? It's a very crowded space, and we wanted to talk to you today about coaching that cuts through. There's a lot of noise around coaching. So what kind of coaching drives actual career impact, especially for women navigating systems that often are not built with them in mind? So over the next half an hour, that is what we are going to be looking at. And it's not all down to me. I have the best guest imaginable. Welcome to Professor Rebecca Jones. Thank you so much for being with us, Rebecca. Good morning to you.
Hi.
And Rebecca is a leading expert in coaching effectiveness. She has a PhD in Work and Organisational Psychology. She's a chartered occupational psychologist. She's a professor in Coaching and Behavioural Change at Henley, which is, of course, world-renowned leading business school, and specialises in evidence-based coaching, inclusive leadership, and lasting behavioural change. So is a crucial person for us to speak to. And even more importantly, I'm delighted to say that Rebecca has just joined us here at Shape Talent. Rebecca, it's really great to have you on board the team. Tell us a little bit about why you were interested in joining Shape Talent.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. And it's great to be here today and talking about a topic that's so close to my heart, really. So, so it was fantastic to join Shape Talent very recently, and for me it was a kind of a no-brainer, really. I guess one of the things, as a coach myself, perhaps not surprisingly, I spend quite a lot of time reflecting on my own career and things that are important to me. And one of the things that I've become much more aware of as I kind of progress through my career is the importance of doing work that's aligned with my values and work that will deliver, hopefully, a lasting positive impact. And in addition to that, I guess it's no surprise as a researcher, I'm really keen to work with organisations that take an evidence-based approach. And Shape Talent ticks both of those boxes for me. So it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up.
Well, we are delighted to have you on board. And while we are just settling in, let me invite people who are joining us live or indeed watching on replay to tell us about your experience of coaching in the chat. Do tell us if you have been coached, if so, how you found it, how long you were coached for. If you're still working with a coach, we'd love to get a sense of how widespread coaching is and people's experiences of it. And just to tell you, I'm going to speak to Rebecca for about the next, sort of 25 minutes or so, and we'll leave a bit of time at the end as well for some questions. So I will keep an eye on the chat. So if you have a question, do drop it in the chat. If you have something that just resonates from what Rebecca says or any experiences you want to share, get stuck into the chat, because we love to start a conversation. We always continue it after the live as well. So there you are, you know what is happening. Okay, Rebecca, as I say, it's brilliant to have you on board. Let's dive in now, because we hear a lot about transformational coaching. But what does the evidence actually say about coaching? What makes coaching measurable and effective, particularly around career progression for women?
That's such a great question. And actually, this was one of the original drivers for me to get into doing research on coaching, because you hear these words kind of bandying around, like being transformational, and they feel like really big claims. And I guess at heart, I'm quite cynical, skeptical person, and I really wanted to understand, is that true? Is that realistic? What can we expect from coaching? And really importantly for me is, what actually makes a difference in coaching? What are those factors or mechanisms that influence how coaching works? So that was a key driver for me about 15 years ago now, when I started conducting research on coaching effectiveness. And I would say my experience as a researcher, but a coach myself, working in this space over that time, says that yes, it can be transformational, but there needs to be certain factors present, or there are certain things that explain how and why it's transformational. So I would say there's kind of three, we can isolate this down into three aspects. Coaching is goal focused. So that means that it helps the coachee really think about what's important to them, why is that important to them, and how will they know when they get there. It gives us space to reflect. So that means we can zoom in or zoom out on what's really important to us. We can understand patterns, perhaps in behaviour over time, and we can really take that step back to examine that, examine ourselves, examine things around us, and make sense of what's going on. And that's not something most of us do on our own automatically. And so having a safe space with a coach that we trust to help us, guide us through that process, to support us through that process, is a very powerful tool. And then finally, coaching really helps us to translate all of this into what we're going to do about it, because that's key to behaviour change. You know, how do we translate learning and awareness into real life change? And that's something coaching is very helpful in doing. It really helps us to think, okay, now I know this about myself, what am I going to do about it? So I'd say that applies to all coaching. But I think in terms of coaching for women, particularly, there are some additional benefits. So the fact is that I think, as you mentioned in your introduction, you know, most of our organisations, most of the systems in society, they weren't built for women, unfortunately. And this can create a number of challenges for women who are, you know, working, who are striving to progress up the career ladder, and, you know, trying to really make sense of kind of what's going on in their life. So often what happens is we can get conflicting feedback, for example. So on the one hand, we're told we need to be more visible, we need to speak up for ourselves, we need to do this to help make sure that the good work that we're doing gets noticed, because if no one notices, how are we going to get promoted? How are we going to progress? On the other hand, we need to avoid coming across as too arrogant or too pushy or too overconfident, because the reality is that that kind of speaking up behaviour doesn't really conform with stereotypical behaviours expected of women. And that means that we can get judged more harshly. So, you know, you've got these real tensions. You know, on the one hand, if you don't speak up, how's anyone going to notice what you're doing? On the other hand, when you are speaking up, you get told that you're being a bit too pushy. You know, coaching gives us that safe space to try and navigate those systems. It's not going to fix the stereotypes and biases that are in society, but the reality is we're still living in this space. And, you know, how can we make sense of that? How do we make the best of what's going on? And too often we see women internalizing this as something wrong with them. And I think coaching really provides the space to recognize, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. This is what's going on. Now, what can I do about it?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'd love to dig into that with you a little bit more, actually, because it leads on to the idea of kind of what's going to shift the dial and the importance of understanding the particular challenges that women may be facing is going to be crucial. So does that mean that really a coach needs to have specialist expertise, needs to understand gender equity, needs to have a kind of industry knowledge? Because often in coaching, we're told, actually, if you have a coaching skill set, you can coach anybody. You don't have to have done the job they're doing. You don't have to be at the level that they're at. So I wonder what your thoughts are about what that means when organisations who are particularly supporting women are looking to bring in a coach.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And this has been a real eye-opener for me, to be honest, because at the start of my journey into learning about coaching, I was trained and educated in coaching skills, like many of us are working in this space. And a core kind of ethos or principle of being a coach is that we have this non-judgmental attitude, or at least strive to obtain a non-judgmental attitude. And that we're working kind of in a very neutral way, free from bias, which supports this idea that the core coaching skills mean that anyone who's a good coach can coach anybody. It doesn't matter what their kind of lived experience is. And in fact, sometimes having a different lived experience or different work experience can bring a fresh perspective. Now, while I don't necessarily disagree with that, and I think sometimes it can be helpful to have a fresh perspective, I think that really plays down the importance of the barriers and challenges that people of certain underrepresented or marginalized groups can face. And in fact, it's a form of invalidation, really, because it's saying that those barriers are so insignificant that it doesn't really matter if we don't have knowledge of them as a coach. It's not going to make a difference. So yeah, I would say this has been over the learning that I've done. This has been one of the biggest shifts for me, because I confess that I was probably in that camp of, we didn't need that expertise right at the start of my career. But the more research, the more work I do in this space, I recognize that isn't true. And I can give an example actually to illustrate that. So this was actually my own experience of being coached. And I'm a very ambitious and driven person. The reality is you don't become a professor if you're not ambitious. It doesn't accidentally happen. It was a very clear career move for me, and I worked hard to achieve that position over a number of years. And I like that about myself. I like being ambitious. I like being driven. It's really helped me get where I am, and it gives me a very clear focus. So I don't ever want to lose that part of my personality, if you like. But what I find, and I don't know if others who are listening who may also identify as being very ambitious, is it also comes with being quite impatient and really always thinking about the future and what's next and how am I going to get there. And I really wanted to try and balance this drive and ambition with being a bit more content and a bit more patient in the moment. So I sought the services of a coach to help me work on this. And what was very interesting and also quite challenging, if I would say, is that this coach, and in hindsight, what I recognized happened was bringing in a lot of biases and stereotypes around women and ambition. So, for example, in the coaching conversation, the coach brought in my husband, brought in my children, and thinking about, well, how do your children feel about your ambition, and what might happen if what might the impact of you working so much beyond them? And even when I kept steering it back and saying that, no, I'm really happy with my work-life balance, this is something separate, the conversation continually kept being brought back to those aspects about the impact of me being very ambitious on my family life. And it really was a horrible experience. I felt very judged. I was really questioning, well, is this having a negative impact on my family? And even though that wasn't something I wanted to talk about. And I really believe that the fact is that my gender was being made much more relevant in the context of ambition than if I was a man. Because the reality is, we know from research that ambition in women, it's almost a dirty word. We're judged to a different standard when we're ambitious, whereas for men, it's much more of a given. And the last thing I would say on this is this isn't about the gender of the coach. My coach in that example was a woman, and we're all as susceptible to perpetuating the biases and stereotypes that exist in society, regardless of our gender. So it's not about the gender of the coach, it's about the knowledge of the systems, the barriers, stereotypes, biases, and how they might implicitly or unconsciously play out and impact the kind of questions that we're asking someone, and whether we're actually kind of reinforcing the very thing that person is trying to overcome. So yeah, for me, that was a long answer for saying, yes, I would say gender equity expertise is really critical when you're coaching women leaders.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer. Thanks, Rebecca. And actually, now's a good moment for me to say, there might be people who are, I'd like to hear more about that. In the chat, I know we'll drop some resources. One of those things is our 3 barriers model. So all of our coaches here at Shape Talent are steeped in our own research, the 3 barriers that face women, and that's really useful to think about what is the kind of particular support that women might need because of the barriers that they face. So it might be interesting for people to get a sense of where we're coming from as coaches. And also, I know you've just written a blog about the need for understanding and context. And as you say, it's not about men can't coach in this space, or you have to have had a particular experience yourself in order to coach, but it is about understanding some of the societal pressures, the different expectations on women, the systems that have arisen around that in the workplace. So I think in the chat, we'll drop both your recent blog and also our 3 barriers model, because it really does give that framework to what you're talking about really nicely, I think. Thanks, Rebecca. So I wonder then, you said right early on that sometimes big words get bandied about coaching. Coaching can be transformational, and there'll be some people, and actually I saw a lovely comment in the chat from Else who said she's loved her coaching, but some people come out of coaching and go, meh, it was nice conversation, didn't really do a whole lot, So I wonder, when we're thinking about kind of good versus game changing coaching, the kind of nice to have, it was a good conversation, versus this actually was really an investment that moved the dial for me and my organization. What should they be looking for? And that might be someone who's looking for their own individual coach, or often it's, heads of people, HR, who are thinking, we want to bring somebody in, we want to have a whole coaching program. What are they going to need to have in mind to get the right setup?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. I mean, I'll mention something very briefly around if you're a buyer of coaching services, and then also kind of that more micro level, I suppose, when working with a coach and the type of things they want to do. So I think, I love coaching. I'm a professor of coaching. I've literally made my whole career about coaching, but I also recognize coaching's not always the right tool. There are lots of interventions that might be suitable. So I think it's really critical to take that strategic approach, identify what the needs are, that what's the problem or challenge you're trying to address, and then consider what's the best solution to that. And sometimes that will be coaching, sometimes it will be something else. And so taking that strategic view, even when you decide that coaching is the correct intervention, how can we then align the kind of objectives in coaching, the design of the intervention itself with what you want to achieve? So that's really important for me. It's having a very intentional design. The whole benefit, the key unique selling point of coaching is that it's tailored and bespoke. So it's not one size fits all. So that's amazing. But so often we see it's kind of really being implemented in a off the shelf type of approach. And I would say that isn't really the most effective way of using coaching. You have to spend the time to understand the client's needs, understand the organizational challenges, understand the individual coaches, and then tailor and match the coaching service based on that. So that's kind of one thing I would say more broadly. I would then say, if we think more at the kind of micro level, so those individual coaching conversations, what really makes a difference for it to be that kind of career changing coaching? I mean, firstly, I'd say it's not about having a cheerleader. So we always say in coaching, you want support and challenge. So when you've got someone who's a cheerleader, they're super supportive. It feels really nice and comfortable to have that kind of supportive conversation. In the moment, it's great. You come out of it feeling wonderful. But the reality is you need some stretch and challenge to take you to the learning edge. And that's where growth and behaviour change happens. And the fact is, it's not always a comfortable place to be. So I think that stretch and challenge is critical. So working with a coach who can do that very safely, so that the relationship is maintained and you can remain open and curious to that stretch, that's key. For me, I'm a psychologist, so I really believe that psychological depth plus systemic awareness is also critical, because ultimately coaching is a tool to enable behaviour change, and psychology helps us understand how people work and how and why they change or they don't change. And equally, that systemic awareness recognises that sometimes, no matter how hard somebody works at achieving something, there may be systemic barriers that influence whether they get there or not. So that kind of depth and awareness from a coach, I would say, is critical as well, because that guides the type of questions you ask, the interventions that you provide. High quality listening is key. So we learn this is like day one of your coaching education, but it's really a lifelong skill. Being able to kind of notice and surface what's not being said as well as being said, those kind of hidden spots, what's currently unknown to the client. And that links to this idea of being at the learning edge, you know, helping someone become aware of things that they previously haven't noticed or kind of really been explicit. I've talked a bit about this already, but this idea that you know, coaching, delivering coaching that has a measurable impact. So we can work with that on an individual level. So understanding what the individual coachee's goals are and how those translate into actions, but also then mapping that on a wider scale. So evaluation is something that's absolutely critical for me to understand what's working, what the impact is, and how we can continually improve what we're doing. And then the final thing that's really important, I believe, is having a holistic approach. So, you know, we can't separate our work selves from our home selves. There's going to be spillover both ways. So when we're coaching, we really need to take the time to understand the whole person, not just the task or the challenge that they're coming with. Even if they have got a very specific challenge, there's often aspects of the whole person we need to explore as well. So that kind of holistic approach is really important, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you I'm just looking in the comments, there's some great comments coming in from Darren, from Renu, about what they think is important in coaching, and some people who've had some great experiences of coaching as well. Sharon, Isabel, Kazi, that's fantastic. Thank you. I can see the odd question coming in as well. So do start to put your questions in, because I'll make a bit of time at the end for that. So I am going to come to them. But in the meantime, I just want to lean into a couple of things you said there, actually, Rebecca. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you talked about the fact that it's really important that coaching is tailored and bespoke. And that if you are a buyer of coaching, that when you approach a coaching organisation, you want to ensure they understand your needs, the organisational challenges. What would that kind of conversation look like? What should people expect? Say they came to Shape Talent or wherever, and they said, you know, we're thinking about, we might need, how would you run that conversation or that process?
Well, like, I guess I kind of run it quite a lot like a coaching conversation, really. So it's about asking questions to understand and identify what it is that the person wants to work on, what their preferences are. So again, it depends whether it's a conversation with buyer of coaching services and understanding those broader strategic challenges that they want to address with coaching, or even with the individual client in understanding what it is they want to target, but also their preferred style. You know, what do they know about themselves already in terms of what works best for them, and then really considering that information when we match our coach and coachee. So we always offer options because, again, research tells us that people respond best when they've got some autonomy. So I would never say this is going to be the best coach for you. But of course, we also don't want to overwhelm people with a huge database of coaches. So we use that information to identify people that we believe would be a good match. And then there you can use that information to go and have a chemistry session and check that connection. Because as I mentioned at the start of our conversation, the relationship is key. You know, for us to engage in that deep reflection, which is sometimes not very comfortable, we have to be able to trust the people that we're working with. And trust looks different for different people. So, you know, that's part of that kind of diagnostic call, as we call it, is really understanding the need, understanding the person, and then being able to propose a solution, a coach, a service that's going to really fit their needs. And yeah, I think that's absolutely critical for me, because it's staying true to what's really impactful in coaching, which is that ability to tailor the service rather than kind of offering this mass blanket approach. And that's what differentiates for me what I would call high quality coaching. And I think you mentioned at the start of the call, this is a crowded marketplace. You know, coaching has grown massively in the last 15 years, and it's still not showing any signs of slowing down. You know, the data indicates most organizations are investing more in coaching, whether that's their internal coaching provision or external coaching. So it is really hard for organizations to know, you know, what's going to be a good investment of those resources, because it's a space which is still very much unregulated. And that makes it really challenging for the buyer, in my opinion, to understand what really high quality coaching looks like. So for us, it's that very tailored approach, getting to know the needs, and then using our wealth of expertise and advice to provide suggestions around what a solution might look like.
Fantastic. Such great insights. Thank you. And as you say, it's an investment, but one that done properly can really yield results. So I love that we've got the idea that it really needs intentionality and good goal setting and discussion. It needs systemic awareness. It needs clear objectives. It needs tracking and measurable progress, you know, moments of evaluation. And it definitely needs, as you said, the kind of coachy fit. So much for people to take away. I'm just going to dive into the chat and have a little look about questions that might have come in. I know that, Fausta had a question. So let me put this to you, Rebecca. This is actually coming from a coach perspective, but we were talking about that need for systemic awareness. And Fausta saying, what do you suggest to a coach who is specifically acquiring expertise in supporting women? So if there are coaches listening who are thinking, well, you know, I want that awareness, I want to build my sense of how the systems might work against women, where can they go looking for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for adding that into the comments, because this is something I've been asked before as well. And I would say at the moment, there isn't, unfortunately, a kind of course or program that you can go on that would very neatly upskill you as a coach to work in this area. So what I would recommend is a great starting point is your own independent learning. So, you know, for me, I've done this gradually over time, and it's often through a lot of reading. You know, there are great resources out there. There's lots of podcasts as well. So, I mean, I would say Shape Talent, on their website, they have an insights section with loads of blogs and white papers that have got great evidence there that's very easy to digest. So I would say that's a great first step. There's lots of excellent books as well on these, on the kind of barriers, and it's not just gender, of course. There are lots of barriers that different marginalized groups face, and I would say everything that I've said about gender applies for other identity and demographic groups as well, in terms of having that knowledge of the unique barriers that they will face. If you're coaching someone from that identity group, as the coach, you need to have that knowledge. So yeah, I suppose I don't have an easy fix for this. It's about investing in your own learning, but a great place to start is you identifying reputable sources. And so Shape Talent's a great place. They take a very evidence-based academic approach, but translating it into something that's very easy to read. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. And I definitely, obviously, I would second that. But it was coming to me actually when you were speaking there, Rebecca, that of course, as you say, it's not always as simple as if only gender. But we did a really interesting previous Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live on intersectionality. Do go back and look at some of our previous LinkedIn Lives as well, because we've had some fantastic guests who've spoken at length about, you know, the particular challenges for women of colour, for people with disabilities. We've done some really interesting work around that. So there is stuff out there, and some really great blogs and resources on our website as well. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us. If you are with us live, that's fantastic. If you're watching on replay, do get into the chat. We will follow up, answer any questions. And if you are curious about high impact coaching. If you want to bring real behavioural change into your leadership, your organisation, then let's talk. Because as I said, we're delighted that Professor Rebecca Jones has joined the team at Shape Talent. So if you're an HR, a people leader, we are offering a free diagnostic call with Rebecca. So if you're interested, we're going to drop into the chat several things. There will be a page on our website, a link there to tell you more about the coaching offer that we have here at Shape Talent, the kind of things you can access. So do take a look at that. We also have a guide that might be useful for you. So a guide for executive women on how to choose the right coach. So do download that. That will give you lots of ideas about how you go about this, really based on what Rebecca was saying about finding that right fit and ensuring you're going to get a return on your investment. And crucially, if you'd like to speak to Rebecca about what might be right for you or your organisation, there will be a Calendly link to Rebecca's diary that we will drop in the chat as well, so that you can access her diary and get in some time to talk to her about your needs. She can make suggestions about what might work for you and take it further if it feels like a good fit. So we're delighted that you joined us. Do look out for our September Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live. August, we take a break. We all go on holiday, we see the sun, but come September we will all be back, so we will be announcing soon who our guests will be for that. But my thanks to Rebecca Jones. Rebecca, we're so pleased that you've joined us at Shape Talent. We know it's going to be a fantastic partnership. You bring so much expertise, and it will be great for those out there to tap into that as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you in September for our next Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live. In the meantime, get in touch with us. Thanks so much, everybody. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thank you.